Do you remember Blockbuster Video? There was like one on every corner. And at the turn of the century, Blockbuster reigned supreme in the video rental industry. If you wanted a family movie night, someone had to drive to the store, one of 9,000 stores they had worldwide, and stroll down the rows of DVD-lined shelves. You picked your movie, you went up, you handed your membership card to an employee who was dressed in blue. Now, Reed Hastings was a founder of a small, struggling startup company called Netflix. And he met with the Blockbuster CEO at the time, John Antecaldo. And this was in the year 2000. And he proposed a partnership with Blockbuster. But he was laughed out of the office. Things were changing, and despite consumer preferences, Blockbuster doubled down on its brick-and-mortar store model by offering popcorn and books and toys. And Netflix, on the other hand, experimented with a mail-order subscription model with no late fees. It only took 10 years for Netflix to become the largest source of streaming internet traffic in North America during peak hours, with over 20 million subscribers. Blockbuster, on the other hand, declared bankruptcy and was bought out by the Dish Network. And by 2013, the last of the 300 company-owned stores closed. Now, I found it interesting that there is still one franchise store open today in Bend, Oregon. Blockbuster spent way too much time remembering their old ways, living in the past, and didn't see a new thing that could have been ahead for the company. And Netflix, they didn't dwell on their past. They could see the new things that were headed their way. Remembering old things and not dwelling on the past and see a new thing is what Isaiah was telling the Israelites in today's Old Testament reading. The first part of that text is a retelling of the Exodus story, of how the Israelites were led out of Egypt through the Red Sea. You remember that story. Moses and the Israelites were fleeing Egypt after what we now call the Passover. And they found themselves on the edge of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's soldiers quickly approaching. They were trapped with nowhere to go. Then God did a new thing and parted the Red Sea. And the Israelites passed through on dry land. And all of those Egyptian soldiers that followed them were killed like the extinguishing of a candle wick when God closed that passageway. Isaiah pointed to this story to give the people hope, because the people during this time were in exile in Babylon. Isaiah was telling them not to dwell on their past. The past was the past. God had taken care of them, and they needed to see the new thing that God was going to do for them. That God was making a way in the desert. That God was putting water in the desert and streams of water in the wilderness for them. Isaiah's point was that God had done great things for them in the past, and a greater thing, a new thing, was ahead. Friends, God has done great things in the past, and Scripture points to new things that are ahead. We see this in Paul's letter to the Philippians. Now, I love the Apostle Paul. He is always so ready to go, so exuberant. But have you noticed that he has a way with the humble brag? In this part of the letter, he's listing all of those things that made him a good Jew. That he was circumcised at 8 days old. How he was from the tribe of Benjamin. How he calls himself the Hebrew of the Hebrews with respect to keeping the law. How as a Pharisee he took pride in harassing the early church. And how he is righteous and blameless under the Now, Paul is using all of this to set up and show his willingness to give up all of the things of his past and to let them go, and to see the new thing that God was doing in his life. Paul realizes that his new relationship in the risen Christ is one of him striving towards the goal of being in a perfect relationship with God. He teaches us that one part of reaching that goal is to learn to forget our old ways, showing us that we are not defined by our past. You know, realizing that we are not defined by our past is important. It's important because all of us have done things that we are not proud of. We've hurt people. We've ignored those who needed our help. And the list could go on and on and on. And then there are those things that appear in the dark times of our lives. Dark times that are just hard to release. The grief, shame, despair, the death, disappointment, the anger, and the depression that we have faced. But there's good news for us, and that God can forgive us for our past wrongdoings, and that we can learn a new thing that will bring us closer to reaching that state of Christian perfection. We need to continue to learn new things in our relationship with Christ, to discern where God is leading us, where God wants to use us. You know, we are called by our relationship with God to learn new things. No matter what our age is, young or old, God uses all of us. Look at how God used a young David to slay the giant Goliath. Or how God used a very old Abram and Sarai to birth a nation. And how can we forget Elizabeth and Zechariah and their new thing found in the form of a little bitty baby named John the Baptist. You know, this thing of old and new kind of reminds me of an old adage. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Did you know that in 1523, an English animal trainer named John Fitzherbert said, "The dog must be trained when he is a puppy, or else he will not be trained, for it is hard to make an old dog find a new scent." Today we summarize that as, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But is that really true? You know, I spend a lot of time watching TV, and one of my favorite shows was Mythbusters on the Discovery Channel. Did you guys ever see that show? That was a show where they would like to take on those old adages and prove them either true or false. So the Mythbusters hosts, Jamie and Adam, decided to go after this one. They found a pair of aging Alaskan Malamutes who didn't know a single trick in the book. Now, Malamutes are known for their stubbornness, and as a 7-year-old canine, the siblings Bobo and Cece were equivalent to a couple of 50-year-olds in dog years. Not old by any stretch of the imagination. Arguably, they did qualify for that old dog category. After 4 days of training, Bobo and Cece proved Fitzherbert flat out wrong. Each dog could heel, sit, lie down, stay, and shake upon command from Jamie and Adam. So the myth was busted. And this means that there isn't any reason why we can't learn a new thing. Friends, our Lenten journey is coming close to an end in less than 2 weeks, when we will be celebrating a new thing that God did through the resurrection of Jesus. And new things from God doesn't stop there for us. God is always providing us with new opportunities to serve. And we should be searching for what new things God wants to do in us and in our church. In our church, maybe God is leading us in a new direction. A direction that to better serve the community and to make new disciples for the kingdom. Maybe we need to let go of the past and look for that new thing that God is doing right here. I suggest as part of our prayer life that we seek where God is leading us as a church, where we as a church can grow, learn, and see those new things that God wants us to do. We need to see it. Not only do we need to see the new thing that's going on that God is going to do in our church, but we need to see the new thing that God is going to do in our lives. God is not done with any of us yet. Every day, God is calling us to a new thing, calling us to be closer to Him, calling us to be made perfect in God's eyes. It's by the death and resurrection of Jesus that all of this is possible. So like Paul, what part of your past do you need to let go of in order to see the new thing that God is doing in your life? Search for the answer with God, for with God you will find it.